December 10th, 2015. Petrolina, Pernambuco State, Brazil. The evangelical school of Petrolina, known for its high educational standards, was filled with children's joyful voices, music, and a festive atmosphere. The school was celebrating the end of the academic year. Parents gathered to watch their children perform, and teachers proudly observed their students. Among the students was 7-year-old Beatriz Angelica Mota, a cheerful girl with a bright smile and kind eyes. Beatriz came to the celebration with her parents, Luciana and Sergio Lear Mota. The Mota family was respected in Petrolina. Luciana worked as a civil servant, and Sergio Lear was a government official. They were proud of their daughter, who demonstrated outstanding academic abilities and was loved by her classmates. The school festival proceeded according to the usual script. Children showcased their talents, singing, dancing, and performing theatrical skits. Beatriz was also scheduled to perform with her class. After her performance, she remained with her parents. Around 9 o'clock, Beatriz asked her mother's permission to go to the bathroom. Luciana let her daughter go, not knowing she would never see her alive again. About 15 to 20 minutes passed, but Beatriz didn't return. Luciana began to worry and went looking for her daughter. She checked the bathroom, asked Beatriz's classmates, but no one had seen the girl. With each passing minute, the anxiety grew. The girl's father joined the search, followed by teachers and other parents. They searched classrooms, corridors, sports grounds, all to no avail. Beatriz seemed to have vanished into thin air. At 10 o'clock, the school administration decided to call the police. The celebration was interrupted, and everyone present was questioned about whether they had seen Beatriz and in which direction she might have gone. No one could imagine that something horrible had happened on the school grounds, full of people, during a festive event. The search continued for several hours. Police officers methodically examined the entire school territory, interviewed witnesses, and checked surveillance cameras. Closer to midnight, one of the officers decided to check an unused school gymnasium, a facility that had long been out of service and was closed to students. Opening the door and shining a flashlight, the police officer saw a small body on the floor. It was Beatriz. The initial examination showed that the girl had received several wounds to the chest area. It was obvious that the child was dead. News of the terrible discovery instantly reached the parents. Luciana Mota's scream upon learning of her daughter's death was heard by everyone present. Sergio Lear Mota, Beatriz's father, couldn't believe what had happened. In an instant, the festive evening turned into the worst nightmare for the Mota family. The school grounds were cordoned off by police. All those present were asked to stay for questioning. Criminologists, forensic experts, and prosecutors arrived at the scene. Painstaking work began to collect evidence. The preliminary conclusion of the medical examiners confirmed that death resulted from multiple wounds. Based on the nature of the wounds, specialists suggested that a knife with a long blade had been used. Establishing the exact time of death was difficult, but experts preliminarily indicated a time frame between 9 and 10 o'clock, precisely when the girl had asked her mother's permission to go to the bathroom. News of the tragedy at the evangelical school of Petrolina quickly spread throughout the city, and then throughout Brazil. The brutal murder of a child within the walls of an educational institution shocked the public. People couldn't understand how such a thing could happen in a school full of people during a festive event. The school, which should have been a safe place for children, became the scene of a horrific crime. The day after the tragedy, a special investigative team was formed. The investigation was led by an experienced detective from the civil police of Pernambuco State. The investigators faced a difficult task: to find a killer who committed a crime in a crowded school where hundreds of potential witnesses were present. First, everyone who attended the school celebration was questioned: teachers, technical staff, parents, students. Investigators tried to reconstruct the chronology of events, find out who last saw Beatriz, who might have been near the unused gymnasium. Checking surveillance camera footage didn't yield significant results. As it turned out, the cameras didn't cover the area near the unused gymnasium, and there was no surveillance system in the facility itself. This substantially complicated the investigators' work. When examining the crime scene, forensic experts discovered several important clues: blood traces, fingerprints, fabric fibers. However, the main problem was that the crime scene wasn't properly isolated in the first hours after the body's discovery. Many people, police officers, medics, school staff, entered the premises, potentially compromising the integrity of the evidence. Investigators considered several versions of what happened. The first version, the murder was committed by a school employee or one of the parents present at the celebration. The second, an outsider infiltrated the school. The third, the crime was committed by a teenager, possibly a high school student. Each version had its weaknesses, but investigators methodically checked all possible scenarios. Special attention was paid to checking the alibis of all adult men who were at the school that evening. School employees, parents, invited guests were checked. Each had to explain where they were between 9 and 10 o'clock. In parallel, laboratory tests of evidence collected at the crime scene were conducted. However, the process was slow due to bureaucratic delays and limited resources of forensic laboratories in Pernambuco State. The first weeks of the investigation didn't bring significant results. Investigators collected a huge amount of testimony but couldn't track down the killer. The public began to express dissatisfaction with the police work, and the Beatrice family felt that justice was slipping away with each passing day. The shock of losing their beloved daughter was replaced by Luciana and Sergio Lier Mota's determination to achieve justice. They couldn't accept that their child's killer remained free while the investigation stalled. The Mota family began their own struggle, a fight for truth and punishment of the guilty. Luciana Mota, despite deep grief, showed incredible strength of spirit. She began studying case materials, meeting with police officers, prosecutors, and journalists. Sergio Lier supported his wife in all her initiatives. Together, they founded the Justice for Beatrice movement, Justiça por Beatriz, which quickly attracted public attention. Social networks became a powerful tool in their fight. The movement's Facebook page gained thousands of followers in a short time. People from all over Brazil expressed support for the family and demanded that the investigation be accelerated. The hashtag #Justiça por Beatriz became popular in the Brazilian segment of Twitter. Luciana gave interviews to all interested media, appeared on television, and participated in radio programs. She talked about her daughter, about what she was like, kind, smart, curious, and each time called on the authorities to do everything possible to catch the killer. The Mota family organized peaceful demonstrations in Petrolina, drawing attention to the case. Hundreds of people took to the streets with portraits of Beatrice and posters demanding justice. The social movement grew, but the official investigation seemed to be going nowhere. Several months after the tragedy, Luciana and Sergio Lier Mota faced their first serious disappointments. They discovered that many pieces of evidence had been collected with violations of procedural norms. Some potential witnesses hadn't been properly questioned, and versions that the family thought promising didn't receive due attention from investigators. "We realized that if we just wait for results from the police, we'll never know the truth," Luciana said in one interview. "So we decided to fight ourselves. Not for revenge, but for justice, so that Beatrice's memory lives on, so that her death wasn't in vain, so that other children are safe." Their struggle was long and difficult. They faced the indifference of officials, bureaucratic obstacles, and threats. But Beatrice's parents didn't give up. Their Justice for Beatrice movement became a symbol of the fight against injustice and impunity in Brazil. A year after the tragedy, the investigation into Beatrice Mota's murder hadn't progressed. The initial investigative team was disbanded, and the case was transferred to other detectives. New investigators were starting practically from scratch, studying collected materials and trying to find missed clues. The leadership of the Pernambuco police changed, and new approaches, a fresh look at the case, were promised. However, this didn't bring substantial results. Criticism of police work from the public and media grew. Experts pointed to numerous mistakes and omissions in the investigation. One of the main problems was the improper preservation of evidence from the crime scene. Since the place where the body was found wasn't properly isolated in the first hours, many potentially important clues were destroyed or contaminated. This significantly complicated the work of forensic experts and reduced the chances of identifying the criminal by DNA or other physical evidence. Suspects appeared and disappeared. First one, then another person came into the focus of investigators' attention, but each time it turned out there wasn't enough evidence of their involvement. Some suspects had alibis. Others didn't match the criminal profile compiled by criminal psychologists. By December 2017, 2 years after the murder, the investigation had officially reached a dead end. The Pernambuco police admitted they couldn't identify the killer despite all efforts made. The case remained open, but active investigation was effectively suspended. This triggered a new wave of public outrage. The Justice for Beatriz movement, led by the girl's parents, organized a massive protest in Petrolina. Thousands of people took to the streets, demanding the resumption of active investigation and the involvement of federal resources. Luciana Mota, in her speech at the rally, said, "2 years have passed, and my daughter's killer is still free. He may be walking the same streets as we are. He may be seeing our protests and laughing at the police's helplessness, but I promise I won't give up until justice prevails." By 2019, after 4 years of fruitless investigation at the state level, it became obvious that federal authorities needed to intervene. The Beatriz family, supported by the social movement and some politicians, began a campaign to transfer the case to the federal police of Brazil. The process was complex and lengthy. There were legal obstacles to transferring the case to the federal level since murder was considered a crime falling under state jurisdiction. Special grounds were required for the federal police to take the investigation under their control. Luciana and Sergio Lear Mota met with senators, deputies, ministers, trying to gain their support. They collected over 100,000 signatures on a petition to transfer the case to federal authorities. The Justice for Beatriz movement organized protest actions not only in Petrolina but also in Brazil's capital, Brasilia. The media played a significant role in this struggle. Journalists conducted their own investigations, revealed mistakes made by the state police, and drew attention to the case at the national level. Documentary films and series of reports appeared, dedicated to Beatriz's murder and her family's fight for justice. In 2021, after a long legal battle and under public pressure, it was decided to transfer the case to the federal police of Brazil. This was a significant victory for the Mota family and all who supported their struggle. "This isn't the end of the road, but only its beginning," said Luciana Mota to journalists after the announcement of the case transfer. "But now we have hope. Hope that federal investigators will be able to do what the state police couldn't: find my daughter's killer." The federal police of Brazil had greater resources, better forensic laboratories, and more experienced investigators. For the investigation of this high-profile case, which by that time had become a symbol of the fight for justice in Brazil, a special unit was formed. The federal police began the investigation with a clean slate. All previously collected materials were thoroughly reviewed, analyzed, and systematized. Investigators discovered numerous omissions in the work of the state police, unexplored versions, and unquestioned witnesses. Special attention was paid to forensic evidence. The federal police had more modern technologies and methodologies, which allowed a fresh look at the collected evidence. Repeated studies of DNA materials, fingerprints, and clothing fibers found at the crime scene were conducted. Investigators re-interviewed key witnesses, teachers, parents, students who were present at the school celebration on the day of the murder. Some details previously overlooked now came to light. Special attention was paid to those who might have seen Beatriz after she asked permission to go to the bathroom. One of the new directions of the investigation was checking all persons who had access to the school territory, including technical staff, security, and temporary workers. Their biographies, possible criminal connections, behavior before and after the murder were checked. In parallel, work was carried out to create a psychological profile of the killer. Forensic experts analyzed the nature of the crime, the characteristics of the wounds, the choice of place and time of attack. This allowed narrowing the circle of suspects and focusing on individuals who matched certain behavioral characteristics. By the end of 2021, investigators had their first serious leads. DNA analysis conducted in federal police laboratories using the latest technologies made it possible to identify genetic material that could belong to the criminal. This information became key for further investigation. Luciana and Sergio Lear Mota were in constant contact with federal investigators. They regularly received information about the progress of the investigation, although many details weren't disclosed to them for reasons of secrecy. But even limited information gave hope that justice would finally prevail. "After so many years of disappointment, we finally see light at the end of the tunnel," Luciana said in one interview. "Federal investigators are doing what should have been done from the very beginning. They're leaving no stone unturned, checking every detail. And I believe they'll find my daughter's killer." The year 2022 became a turning point in the investigation of the Beatrice Mota case. Federal investigators studying the case materials and conducting new examinations discovered previously unnoticed evidence pointing to a specific suspect. He turned out to be Marcello Ranieri, who on the day of the murder was working as a temporary employee at the school, helping to organize the celebration. Repeated DNA analysis found on Beatrice's clothing with high probability pointed to Ranieri. Additionally, investigators established that the suspect didn't have a solid alibi for the time of the murder. In his initial testimony, he claimed he was in another part of the school, but new witness statements refuted this version. Additional evidence was obtained after analyzing Marcello Ranieri's phone conversations and his social media activity. It turned out that after the murder, he suddenly changed his behavior, deleted social media accounts, changed his phone number, and even moved to another city. Ranieri's psychological profile also matched the criminal profile compiled by experts. They discovered his tendency toward violence, problems with anger control, and his past revealed episodes of animal cruelty, a known precursor to more serious crimes. As evidence accumulated, investigators began to lean toward the version that Ranieri wasn't acting alone. Analysis of the crime scene and the nature of the wounds indicated the possible participation of at least one more person. Several of Ranieri's acquaintances, who were also present at the school celebration that fateful day, came into the police's field of vision. In early 2023, investigators had gathered enough evidence to request arrest warrants for Marcello Ranieri and several of his alleged accomplices. The federal judge, after reviewing the presented evidence, issued the warrants. Luciana and Sergio Lier Mota were informed about the upcoming arrests. After 7.5 years of struggle, justice was finally beginning to prevail. But Beatrice's parents understood that the arrest of suspects was just the beginning of a lengthy legal process, and there was still a long way to go until the court's final verdict. In June 2023, special operations to detain suspects in the murder of Beatrice Mota were conducted simultaneously in several Brazilian cities. Marcello Ranieri was arrested in the city of Fortaleza, where he had been hiding in recent years. 2 more suspects were detained in Petrolina and São Paulo. News of the arrests instantly spread throughout the country. For many Brazilians following the Beatrice case, it became a symbol that even after years, justice can prevail. Thousands of people expressed support for the Mota family on social networks, and a spontaneous march took place in Petrolina in memory of Beatrice and in honor of the progress in the investigation. The press conference organized by the federal police after the detentions gathered dozens of journalists from all over Brazil. The head of the investigative team talked about the key evidence that led to identifying the suspects, but many details of the investigation remained classified until the trial began. This is the result of painstaking work by our investigators, forensic experts, and analysts, said the federal police representative. But it's also the result of the tireless struggle of the Beatrice family and public support that didn't allow this case to be forgotten. The trial in the case of Beatrice Mota's murder began in late 2023 and attracted unprecedented attention from the public and media. Given the public resonance of the case, special security measures were taken: enhanced security of the court building, thorough checking of all those present, limited press access. Marcello Ranieri and his 2 alleged accomplices were officially charged with the premeditated murder of a minor with particular cruelty. All 3 denied their guilt, insisting that the evidence against them was either fabricated or misinterpreted. The prosecution presented to the court an impressive volume of evidence: results of DNA analyses, witness testimonies, surveillance camera records, analysis of phone conversations, psychological characteristics of the accused. Special attention was paid to the motive for the crime, which still remained not fully clear. According to the prosecution's version, Ranieri's primary motive was sexual, although the investigation found no signs of violence against Beatrice. It was assumed that the girl accidentally discovered Ranieri in the unused gymnasium when he was engaged in something illegal, and he killed her, so she couldn't tell anyone about it. The defense of the accused was built on undermining trust in the collected evidence. Lawyers pointed to violations in the procedure of collecting evidence at the initial stage of the investigation, to potential contamination of DNA materials, to the unreliability of some witness testimonies. They insisted that their clients had become scapegoats after years of fruitless investigation. During the trial, dozens of witnesses were questioned. Teachers and school employees, parents and students present at the celebration, forensic experts, and psychologists. Some witnesses recalled details that hadn't previously appeared in the case materials, which complicated the work of both the prosecution and the defense. Particularly emotional was Luciana Moda's testimony in court. She talked about her daughter, about what she was like, kind, smart, cheerful. She described the last moments spent with her at the school celebration and shared what the family had gone through over these years, from the grief of loss to the fight for justice. "Today, I speak not only as a mother who lost her daughter," said Luciana, addressing the court. "I speak on behalf of all parents in Brazil who want their children to be safe, who want such a tragedy to never happen again." The trial continued for several months. As it progressed, it became increasingly evident that the evidence against Marcelo Ranieri and his accomplices was very convincing. Particularly important were the results of new DNA analyses conducted using modern technologies that weren't available to investigators at the initial stage of the investigation. The Beatriz Moda case, beyond its immediate legal significance, had a profound impact on Brazilian society and legislation. The tragedy and the subsequent years-long struggle of the family for justice led to a number of important changes in the system of child protection and investigation of crimes against minors. In 2021, even before the arrests of suspects, a law known as the Beatriz Moda Law was passed in Pernambuco state. It toughened penalties for crimes against children and adolescents and established new safety standards for educational institutions. The law prescribed the presence of surveillance cameras in all schools, strict control of access to educational institutions, and special staff training on security issues. The Evangelical School of Petrolina, where the tragedy occurred, underwent significant changes. The unused gymnasium, which became the scene of the murder, was demolished, and a memorial garden in memory of Beatriz was created in its place. The school implemented unprecedented security measures, becoming in this respect a model for other educational institutions in Brazil. Luciana and Sergio Lear Moda established the Beatriz Foundation, which deals with issues of protecting children from violence. The foundation conducts educational programs, provides psychological support to children who have suffered from violence in families, and lobbies for legislative changes at the federal level. "We couldn't protect our daughter," Luciana said in one interview. "But through the foundation, we strive to protect thousands of other children so that parents don't experience the same grief as we did." The Justice for Beatriz movement, which began as a local initiative of parents, grew into a national movement against violence towards children. It united thousands of activists across Brazil, drew attention to child safety issues, and became a symbol of civic activity and persistence. In early 2024, the court delivered its verdict in the case of Beatriz Moda's murder. Marcelo Ranieri was found guilty of murder with particular cruelty and sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment, the maximum term provided by Brazilian legislation. His two accomplices received shorter terms, 24 and 18 years respectively, for complicity in the crime. The verdict was met with relief by the Beatriz family and thousands of people who followed the trial. However, the lawyers of those convicted immediately announced their intention to appeal the court's decision, which meant that the legal battle was not yet over. "This isn't the end of the road," said Luciana Moda after the verdict was announced, "but it's an important step towards justice. We'll continue to fight, no matter how long it takes." Despite the verdict, many questions remain unanswered. The motive for the murder wasn't fully clarified during the trial. Marcelo Ranieri never admitted his guilt and didn't explain why he committed this terrible crime against an innocent child. The Beatriz Moda case became a symbol of both a tragic failure of the child protection system and the power of parental love and social solidarity. It showed how ordinary people can fight against injustice and achieve changes that seemed impossible. Today, if you visit Petrolina and enter the memorial garden on the territory of the Evangelical School, you'll see a beautiful statue of a little girl with a book in her hands. This is a monument to Beatriz Moda, whose life was so cruelly cut short, but whose legacy continues to live. Every day, people come to the monument, leaving flowers, toys, notes, school children, their parents, tourists, passers-by. Many of them never personally knew Beatriz, but her story touched their hearts. Luciana and Sergio Lear Moda continue their work through their daughter's foundation. They speak at conferences, meet with politicians, support other families who have lost children due to violence. Their fight for justice for Beatrice has grown into a broader mission to create a world where every child can feel safe. "Sometimes I feel that Beatrice is next to me," Luciana once confessed. "And in these moments, I promise her that I will never stop fighting, not only for her, but for all children who need protection. This is a promise I intend to keep." The story of Beatrice Mota and her family's struggle for justice remains unfinished, but it has already become a powerful reminder that even in the darkest situations, the light of truth can ultimately prevail, and that the memory of an innocent victim can become a catalyst for positive changes in society. The case of Beatrice Mota drew attention not only to a specific crime, but also to broader systemic problems in ensuring children's safety in educational institutions. This case made many reflect on how security is organized in schools, who has access to school territories, and how effective existing mechanisms for protecting children are. One of the main lessons of this tragedy was the understanding of the need for a comprehensive approach to safety in schools. It's not enough to just install surveillance cameras or hire guards. Systematic work is required to check personnel, train employees to recognize potential threats, and create clear protocols for actions in emergency situations. Another important lesson is the need for immediate and professional reaction of law enforcement agencies to crimes against children. Initial mistakes in the investigation of the Beatrice Mota case, insufficient preparation of investigators, lack of necessary technical means. All this led to a years-long delay in achieving justice. The tragedy also highlighted the importance of civic activity and public control. It was the persistence of the Mota family and the support of thousands of ordinary Brazilians that ultimately led to the case being transferred to federal authorities and a breakthrough in the investigation. This shows that even individual citizens, by uniting, can influence the work of the state system and achieve positive changes. Although Beatrice's killers were convicted, the fight for justice and children's safety continues. The Beatrice Foundation, created by her parents, annually holds events in memory of the girl and to draw attention to the problems of violence against children. On Beatrice's birthday, December 10th, schools throughout Brazil conduct lessons dedicated to safety issues and protecting children from violence. Many schools organize special events where children learn how to recognize dangerous situations and whom to turn to for help. The Beatrice Mota law, initially adopted only in Pernambuco state, has become a model for similar legislation in other regions of Brazil. The movement for the adoption of similar measures at the federal level continues to gain strength. The story of Beatrice Mota and her family's struggle for justice has become an integral part of public consciousness in Brazil. It reminds us that behind every statistic of crimes against children stand real lives, real families, real pain, and that only by joining efforts, parents, schools, law enforcement agencies, society as a whole, can we create a world in which children will be truly protected. Ultimately, this is a story not only about tragedy, but also about the power of the human spirit, about unwavering parental love that knows no bounds, about how pain and suffering can be transformed into a force capable of changing society for the better. And although Beatrice is no longer with us, her memory continues to live, inspiring thousands of people to fight for a safer world for all children. Perhaps this is the greatest justice that can be achieved in the face of such an irreparable loss. In the small Texas town of Dickinson, located in Galveston County, life flowed steadily and peacefully until the night of August 10, 1990. Even the most experienced police officers couldn't have anticipated the shock that awaited their community. 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett was an ordinary, cheerful girl. During those summer days of 1990, she was enjoying her vacation, playing with friends, and dreaming about the future. Like many children her age, Jennifer was full of energy and curiosity. On the night of August 10th, Jennifer, as usual, went to bed in her room in the apartment where she lived with her mother. The window was slightly open due to the hot Texas weather. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The night in Dickinson seemed quiet and safe, like many others. But that night, the tranquility was disturbed. An unknown perpetrator, taking advantage of the open window, entered the sleeping girl's room. Jennifer was abducted, right from her own bed. The criminal acted quietly and discreetly. None of the neighbors heard any suspicious sounds or screams. The next morning, Jennifer's mother discovered her daughter's bed empty. The room looked almost untouched, but the girl was nowhere to be found. At first, there was a thought that she might have gone to neighbors or friends, but a quick round of calls to acquaintances yielded no results. Realizing that something terrible had happened, her mother immediately contacted the police. Within hours, the quiet town of Dickinson turned into the center of large-scale search operations. The Galveston County Police began an investigation, neighbors were questioned, and search groups were organized. News of the missing girl quickly spread throughout the vicinity. Volunteers joined the search, combing nearby areas in hopes of finding any traces. While police and volunteers combed Dickinson in search of Jennifer, the girl herself was in a desperate situation. Her abductor had taken her outside the city to a remote field near an abandoned road. After committing his crime, he inflicted severe injuries on Jennifer and left her in the field, believing the girl would not survive. Jennifer had serious injuries, including deep throat wounds that prevented her from screaming or calling for help. But contrary to all the criminal's expectations, the girl remained alive. Despite her young age, she showed incredible strength of spirit and will to live. Lying in the field, unable to move or speak, Jennifer remained conscious. She understood that she had to fight for her life. Tormented by thirst and pain, she stayed conscious, hoping that someone would find her. On the morning of August 11th, approximately 14 hours after the abduction, a group of workers passing by the abandoned road noticed something unusual in the field. Coming closer, they were horrified to discover a severely injured girl. Despite being unable to speak, Jennifer was conscious. The workers immediately called for an ambulance and the police. Medical personnel arriving at the scene were amazed that the girl was still alive, considering the severity of her injuries and the long time spent without help in the open air. Jennifer was urgently transported to the nearest hospital, where doctors began fighting for her life. At the hospital, medical staff diagnosed serious injuries that could have been fatal. The girl underwent emergency surgery. Doctors did everything possible, but the injuries were so severe that complete recovery seemed unlikely. Damage to her vocal cords was an especially serious problem. Doctors weren't sure if Jennifer would ever be able to speak again. While Jennifer was in the hospital, detectives from the Dickinson Police Department began an intensive investigation. This case became a priority for the entire department. The best detectives were brought in, as well as specialists from nearby cities. The first step was examining the crime scenes, both the apartment from which Jennifer was abducted and the field where she was found. Forensic experts collected all possible evidence: fingerprints from the windowsill and other surfaces in the girl's room, soil and vegetation samples from where the victim was found, and tire tracks on the dirt road next to the field. Special attention was paid to collecting biological samples. In 1990, DNA analysis technology was just beginning to be used in forensics, but investigators understood its potential value. They carefully collected and preserved all samples of biological material found at the crime scene. In parallel, detectives questioned all residents of the area where Jennifer lived. They looked for witnesses who might have seen something suspicious on the night of the abduction. Unfamiliar cars, strange people, or unusual activity. People with criminal backgrounds living in the area were also checked, especially those previously convicted of crimes against children. Investigators compiled an approximate timeline of events. According to their estimates, the abduction occurred between 2 and 3 a.m. The perpetrator likely took Jennifer away in a vehicle, which was confirmed by tire tracks near the field. The distance from the apartment to where the girl was found was about 5 kilometers. Despite all efforts, the first weeks of investigation did not bring substantial results. The police had neither reliable witnesses nor a clear description of the suspect. The only person who had seen the abductor was Jennifer herself, but due to her serious condition, she couldn't give testimony. Doctors' prognoses regarding Jennifer's health were cautious. After several surgeries, her life was out of danger, but recovery promised to be long and difficult. The loss of her voice due to throat injury remained an especially serious problem. For several weeks after the attack, Jennifer could only communicate through notes. She quickly learned to express her thoughts in writing, demonstrating remarkable psychological resilience for a child who had experienced such trauma. After several months of intensive therapy, what many considered impossible happened. Jennifer began to speak. At first, it was just a whisper, but gradually her voice grew stronger. This became a real breakthrough, not only for her recovery, but also for the investigation. As soon as Jennifer was able to communicate, investigators carefully began to question her about the events of that night. Despite her young age, she showed remarkable observational skills and ability to recall details. Jennifer was able to describe the person who abducted her. According to her, the abductor was a white man with dark hair and a mustache. He introduced himself as a police officer and told her that her mother had been in an accident. This was how he forced the girl to go with him. Jennifer remembered that he smoked cigarettes and drove a dark car, though she later described it as a white or light-colored two-door vehicle. Based on Jennifer's description, a police artist created a composite portrait of the suspect, which was distributed throughout the region. The sketch was shown on local television and published in newspapers. The police hoped that someone would recognize this man and provide information. Despite the appearance of the composite portrait and the active work of investigators, Jennifer Schuett's case gradually grew cold. Dozens of calls with information came in from citizens, but none led to a breakthrough in the investigation. The Dickinson Police Department continued to keep the case open. Periodically, new detectives reviewed the materials, hoping to find overlooked clues or new approaches to the investigation. Nevertheless, as time passed, activity on the case decreased. For Jennifer, these years were a time of recovery and adaptation to a new reality. Physical injuries gradually healed, although complete voice recovery did not occur. Her speech remained slightly hoarse forever. The psychological consequences were no less serious. Nightmares, fear of darkness, and distrust of strangers became part of her life. However, Jennifer showed remarkable resilience. With the support of her family and psychologists, she gradually returned to normal life. She went back to school, where she initially faced difficulties due to increased attention to her story, but over time was able to find her place in the school community. As Jennifer grew older, she thought more and more about what had happened to her. She began collecting information about her case, cutting out newspaper articles and recording everything she could remember about the night of the attack. Gradually, a determination grew within her not to let the perpetrator remain unpunished. By the early 2000s, Jennifer Schuett's case had become one of the most famous unsolved crimes in the history of Galveston County. Every year, on the anniversary of the attack, local media remembered this story, but there was no real progress in the investigation. It seemed that the criminal would never be found. By the mid-2000s, a real revolution had occurred in the world of forensics. DNA analysis technologies had significantly improved, allowing work with minimal and even degraded samples. Throughout the country, old, unsolved cases began to be reviewed using new technologies. In 2008, almost 18 years after the attack, Jennifer Schuett's case got a second chance. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, launched an initiative to review old cases using new DNA analysis methods. Jennifer's case was included in this program. By this time, Jennifer Schuett was already an adult woman. She never gave up hope of finding the person who had destroyed her childhood. Learning about the new FBI initiative, she actively got involved in the process, providing additional information and memories that could help the investigation. Preserved biological material samples from the crime scene were sent to the FBI laboratory for analysis using the latest technologies. The process was complicated due to the age and condition of the samples, but the forensic experts didn't give up. In parallel, FBI Special Agent Tim Crompty and Texas Department of Public Safety Detective Richard Riedel began studying all case materials anew. They reviewed witness testimonies, reanalyzed evidence, and looked for new approaches to the investigation. Work with DNA brought the first results in early 2009. Experts were able to isolate the attacker's DNA profile from preserved samples. This profile was entered into CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, a national database containing genetic profiles of criminals and evidence from crime scenes. For Jennifer and the investigators, this was a huge breakthrough. Now there was a possibility of identifying the attacker if his DNA was already in the database, or if he would ever be arrested and his DNA added to the system. In October 2009, what Jennifer had been waiting for almost 2 decades finally happened. The CODIS system found a match with the DNA profile. The genetic material preserved from the crime scene against Jennifer matched the DNA of a man named Dennis Earl Bradford. Bradford, at the time of the match, was in an Arkansas prison, serving a sentence for a similar crime. In 1996, he was convicted of kidnapping and assaulting a young woman. It was in connection with this crime that his DNA was entered into the CODIS system. The investigation into Bradford's identity revealed shocking facts. In 1990, when the attack on Jennifer occurred, he was 29 years old. He worked as a welder and often moved from place to place looking for work. During the period of the kidnapping, Bradford lived in League Cities, just a few kilometers from Dickinson, where Jennifer lived. Even before the attack on Jennifer, Bradford had a criminal history. In the 1980s, he had already been convicted of a similar crime in another state, but was released on parole. After his release, he moved to Texas, where, as it now became known, he committed the attack on Jennifer Schuett. Bradford's physical description matched what Jennifer remembered about her abductor. Dark hair, mustache, average height, even the car that Bradford owned in 1990, a light-colored two-door Chevrolet Cavalier, corresponded to the description given by Jennifer. When Jennifer was shown Bradford's photograph, she instantly recognized him. For her, it was a moment of colossal emotional shock. For the first time in 19 years, she saw the face of the man who had changed her life forever. Based on the DNA match and other evidence, Dennis Earl Bradford was charged with the kidnapping and assault of Jennifer Schuett. In October 2009, he was formally charged and extradited from Arkansas to Texas for trial. News of the arrest of a suspect in the attack on Jennifer Schuett quickly spread throughout Dickinson and all of Texas. For many city residents who remembered this crime, the news was a long-awaited relief. For Jennifer herself, Bradford's arrest meant the possibility of finally closing this chapter of her life. After being charged, Dennis Bradford appeared before the Galveston County Court. He faced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The evidence against him was irrefutable. DNA match, victim identification, matching description, and vehicle. However, the court proceedings took an unexpected turn. On May 10, 2010, just a few months after his arrest and before the start of a full trial, Dennis Bradford was found dead in his cell. He had committed suicide, leaving a suicide note, the contents of which were not fully disclosed to the public. Bradford's death caused mixed feelings for Jennifer. On one hand, she had hoped to see him stand trial and hear the verdict. On the other hand, his death meant the final conclusion to this chapter of her life. And Jennifer Schuett's story became a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of never giving up in the search for justice. Her case also highlighted the significance of preserving DNA evidence and continuing to work on unsolved cases even decades later. After the case closed, Jennifer did not fade into the shadows. On the contrary, she transformed her experience into a mission to help other victims of violent crimes. She began giving public speeches, sharing her story, and inspiring other survivors not to lose hope. Jennifer became an active advocate for legislative changes aimed at improving methods for investigating crimes against children and increasing the retention periods for DNA evidence. She collaborated with various organizations helping violence victims and founded her own foundation to support children who have experienced traumatic events. Jennifer's story attracted the attention of national media. Documentaries and television programs were made about her, including an episode of the popular CBS program 48 Hours. These projects helped bring her story to millions of people, inspiring other survivors and reminding society of the importance of persistence in seeking justice. Today, Jennifer Schuett continues her work as an advocate for crime victims. She has created a family and found happiness despite the traumatic experience of her childhood. Her life has become a testament that even after the darkest moments, recovery and growth are possible. Jennifer Schuett's case changed law enforcement's approach to investigating similar crimes. It emphasized the importance of preserving DNA evidence indefinitely and became an example of how technological progress can help solve seemingly hopeless cases. For the residents of Dickinson, Jennifer's story remains a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, does arrive. For law enforcement agencies, her case serves as motivation never to give up in the search for truth. But the most important legacy of this story is Jennifer herself and her incredible strength of spirit. The girl who was left to die in a field not only survived, but grew into a strong woman who uses her experience to change the world for the better. Jennifer Schuett's story is not just an account of a terrible crime. It's a story about survival, resilience, hope, and ultimately the triumph of justice. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one shouldn't lose hope, and that persistence and faith in justice can overcome even the longest delays. Indianapolis, January 2024. Newberry Road, one of many streets in the American Midwest where life unfolds in its usual rhythm. The Timber Point Apartments complex seemed an island of predictability and relative calm. Standard apartment buildings, parking lots, playgrounds in the distance. In the evenings, warm light would glow in the windows, creating an illusion of coziness and safety. But behind one of those doors, in apartment 6300, that illusion shattered against a monstrous reality. It was here, within walls that should have been a fortress, that the short story of 2-year-old Skylar Gardner unfolded and tragically ended. Her death was the senseless yet predictable outcome of months of unimaginable neglect, the culmination of a story where maternal love had been replaced by selfishness and indifference. On the evening of January 25th, the usual hum of the apartment complex was broken by sirens. It all started with a 911 call. The voice of 33-year-old Chantel Gardner, Skylar's mother, likely sounded distressed as she reported a terrible discovery to the dispatcher. She had found her youngest daughter motionless, cold to the touch. The cause, she claimed, was a fallen dresser. The story Chantel told sounded like a tragic accident, a sudden blow of fate that could strike any family. But this version was merely a facade, hiding a truth capable of shocking even those who had seen much human suffering in the line of duty. The first responders who crossed the threshold of apartment 6300, paramedics and police officers, encountered a scene impossible to forget. This wasn't just a neglected dwelling. It was a place where the very concept of home had been obliterated. The choking stench of rotting garbage, excrement, and filth hit them immediately. Piles of waste covered the floor, littered with sharp kitchen knives, used syringes, cigarette butts, a deadly environment for small children. It became obvious that the light dresser Chantel mentioned couldn't have caused the death. It stood partially leaning against a chair, a flimsy structure of fabric and metal. Death hadn't come to Skylar from its fall. The little girl's physical state spoke for itself. Her body was cold, and signs of rigor mortis indicated she had been dead for many hours, long before her mother called 911. Chantel's initial story collapsed like a house of cards, exposing an abyss of parental negligence. Skylar Gardner. What was she like? The few surviving fragments of information paint a picture of a quiet, perhaps slightly withdrawn girl with large, clear eyes that should have seen a world full of color and wonder, not filth and darkness. She loved the color pink, the color of a carefree childhood she never had. Her only friend and solace was a small plush bunny she never let go of, as if clinging to the last island of warmth and safety in her cold world. Her world was unthinkable without her 4-year-old brother. They weren't just brother and sister, they were a survival team, two little souls lost in a nightmare created by their own mother. They shared everything: hunger, cold, fear. They played together amidst the garbage, slept together on the freezing floor, huddled close for warmth they desperately lacked. Their silent mutual support was the only constant in their unstable and frightening lives. This hell hadn't lasted just one day. The investigation established that for at least 3 months since October 2023, the children had lived in conditions that couldn't simply be called bad. Chantel Gardner, their mother, had retreated deeper into her own reality, built on ambitions, parties, and a relationship with her boyfriend, 30-year-old Brian Thomas. Her absences grew longer, first hours, then nights, then several days at a time. The children were left alone, locked within 4 walls that had become their prison. The conditions of their existence were beyond comprehension. In winter, the apartment wasn't heated, turning it into an icy trap where the temperature hovered around 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. 7 to 10 Celsius. Normal food was out of the question. Their mother, if she appeared at all, did so only for a moment, to leave a bag of leftovers from the nearest fast food joint. Cold burgers, stuck together nuggets, limp wings, chips, all washed down with sugary sports drinks. Clean water was scarce. The older boy, showing resourcefulness born of desperation, had learned to climb onto the kitchen counter to reach the faucet and quench his and his sister's thirst. They slept on the filthy floor, amidst the waste. Their diapers were changed so rarely that the skin underneath had become a continuous painful sore. Over time, the little ones even stopped crying when they soiled themselves. Bitter childhood experience had taught them. Tears were useless. No one would come. No one would help. Surrounding them weren't bright, stimulating toys, but syringes, cigarette butts, sharp fragments. A constant threat. Yet even in this darkness, sprouts of childhood resilience emerged. They found reasons to smile, for quiet laughter, their innocence desperately clinging to life despite the suffocating indifference of the adult world. Chantel's rare visits brought the children no joy. She smelled of cigarettes and alcohol. Later, she would admit to investigators that she grimaced in disgust at the sight of her soiled children. She would mechanically give them food and hurry back out, to her boyfriend, to her friends, to her real life. Timid requests, "Mommy, play, Mommy, stay," were met with irritated dismissal. The children were fading before her eyes. They lagged in development, barely gained weight, suffered from constant stomach pain, coughs, fevers. But their physical and emotional suffering seemed not to concern their mother at all. Her focus was directed outward, on creating an illusion of success. The world of social media knew a different Chantel Gardner. Under the pseudonym Chantel BWI, or Boyer, both names appeared in different sources, she cultivated the image of a strong, independent, go-getter woman. Her YouTube channel and Facebook pages were showcases for her ambitions. There, she was an aspiring rap star, performing her tracks with confidence and style. She presented herself to her followers as well-groomed, fashionably dressed, in clean, bright interiors, a stark contrast to the exhausted, perhaps indifferent woman who occasionally appeared at the threshold of apartment 6300. She posted selfies from parties, shared her thoughts on life, music, success. She bragged about new purchases, talked about her achievements, even about becoming a women's basketball coach. She created the image of an active, purposeful person, perhaps even inspiring others. In this carefully constructed online reality, there was no room for dirty diapers, children's cries, hunger, or cold. Her children, Skylar and her brother, seemed not to exist in this glittering world. Not a single photo, not a single tender word, not a single mention of their small joys or sorrows. This dissonance between the glossy picture and the squalid reality was deafening. How could a woman so concerned with her public image neglect her closest and most vulnerable dependents so monstrously? In retrospect, one of her posts, published shortly before the January tragedy, took on a particularly sinister tone. "I don't trust anyone except my children," Chantel wrote, though things aren't so straightforward with the second one. The second child was Skylar. What did this strange, ambiguous phrase mean? Was it a fleeting thought, poor wording? Or was it a dark, subconscious hint at her true feelings toward her little daughter? Irritation, resentment, seeing Skylar as a burden? In light of subsequent events, these words sounded like a terrible omen, as if a crack in her mask had momentarily revealed the cold void within. The illusion finally shattered on the evening of January 25th, 2024. While Chantel was building her virtual life, her daughter's real life came to a tragic end. The evidence gathered at the scene and during the subsequent examination left no stone unturned of her initial story about an accident. The medical examiners presented findings that chilled the blood. Skylar's small body wasn't just lifeless, it bore multiple signs of prolonged suffering. Bruises of various sizes and shapes, bite marks, later confirmed to be human. Trauma to her lip. All pointed to possible physical abuse or, at the very least, a complete lack of care and protection in a dangerous environment. Signs of frostbite on her tiny hands and feet were irrefutable proof that the child had spent her final hours, possibly days, in the piercing cold of the unheated apartment. The autopsy revealed even more horrific details. Hair, paint chips, and other inedible items were found in the girl's stomach. Desperate, instinctive attempts to appease agonizing hunger with anything she could find in that filthy apartment. Her body was severely emaciated and dehydrated. Ultimately, the cold itself was the direct cause of death. Hypothermia, a dry medical term concealing the agonizing death of a small child freezing alone, just meters away from unsuspecting neighbors. Her 4-year-old brother survived only by a miracle. When he was taken to Riley Children's Hospital, doctors were shocked by his condition. Physically, he suffered from severe constipation, a consequence of malnutrition and dehydration, and extreme emaciation. But the emotional wounds were even more terrifying. The boy was frightened, weak, flinching at any touch or sound. He showed all the signs of severe food trauma, panicking that his food would be taken away, eating ravenously in huge bites, as if trying to stock up, as if unable to believe that food would now be consistently available. Doctors understood. The boy was on the brink, and any delay in help could have cost him his life. His rescue became the only bright spot in this grim story, but the scars left by the nightmare he endured will stay with him for life. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Chantel Gardner began to talk. Her initial statements of shock and ignorance gave way to confused, contradictory accounts. She tried to evade responsibility, blaming circumstances, fatigue, a difficult life. But under pressure from investigators, the mask began to slip, revealing cold indifference. She confessed that the unbearable stench in the apartment kept her away, so she preferred spending time at her boyfriend's. Confessed she bathed the children sporadically, once a week or two, just to wash off the accumulated dirt and excrement. Confessed she saw her daughter's health problems, saw her suffering from dirty diapers, but did nothing to help. She confirmed she left her 2-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son alone every night, condemning them to cold, hunger, fear, and complete isolation, while she sought comfort and entertainment elsewhere. Her confessions, devoid of emotion and remorse, sounded like a report on someone else's life, as if she were talking not about her own children, but about some inconvenient objects interfering with her life. Her boyfriend, Brian Thomas, inevitably came under investigation. What was his role? Did he know what was happening in apartment 6300? Could he have intervened? Initially, the 30-year-old man tried to lie, claiming he knew nothing, that he thought the children were with relatives when Chantel stayed over. He tried to protect his girlfriend, but a check of his phone and further questioning forced him to admit the truth. Yes, Chantel spent most of the week at his place. Yes, he knew the children were often left alone. He had last seen them a month before the tragedy. Although there was no direct evidence of his involvement in abuse or neglect, his lies to investigators and passive knowledge of the situation led to charges of aiding a criminal. He didn't pull the trigger, but he stood by and didn't try to stop the shooter. The tragedy of Skylar Gardner is not just a story of one mother's criminal negligence and her partner's possible complicity. It's also a story of deep, pervasive indifference from those around them. The investigation uncovered numerous missed opportunities, many alarm bells that no one properly heeded. The children's biological father, living in another state and disabled, was denied the ability to communicate with them. His calls and messages went unanswered. Chantel isolated the children not only from herself, but also from others who might have noticed something was wrong. Other relatives who managed to see the little ones occasionally noticed the smell of urine, their unkempt appearance, but their concerns didn't translate into decisive action. Neighbors in the Timber Point Apartments complex couldn't have missed the horrific odor seeping from apartment 6300 into the common hallway. Some heard children crying at night. But the fear of seeming intrusive, the reluctance to get involved in other people's business, perhaps simply fatigue and absorption in their own problems, all led to inaction. We thought about complaining to the manager, but never got around to it. This phrase became a bitter leitmotif in witness testimonies. Even the property management company, after receiving complaints about the smell, limited itself to formal reminder letters about maintaining cleanliness, without bothering to check what was actually happening behind the apartment door. This collective blindness, this silent acceptance of the abnormal situation, created a vacuum around Skylar and her brother in which their suffering remained invisible and unheard. One call to Child Protective Services could have initiated a support mechanism, could have pulled the children out of that hell, could have saved Skylar's life. But the call never came. The wall of indifference proved stronger than the thin walls of the apartment building. When the details of the case became public knowledge, the reaction was swift and unequivocal. People were overcome with shock, anger, and disbelief. How could something like this happen in modern society? How could a mother do this to her children? Particular outrage was fueled by the contrast between the children's horrific living conditions and Chantel's active, outwardly successful life on social media. Her posts about parties, music, sports achievements against the backdrop of her children's suffering seemed sacrilegious. People left angry comments on her pages, demanding the harshest punishment. The Marion County Prosecutor's Office responded to the public outcry and the weight of the evidence by filing the most serious possible charges against Chantel Gardner, including murder. The prosecution's stance was firm. This was not simply negligence through carelessness, but the knowing creation of conditions incompatible with life, an awareness of the high probability of a fatal outcome if her actions continued. The court set a date for a jury trial, which would decide Chantel's fate in this complex and emotionally charged case. She faced life imprisonment. Brian Thomas was also charged, although less severely. Lawyers commenting on the case noted that the key issue for the jury would be determining the degree of Chantel's awareness. Did she know her actions were highly likely to result in death? Proving this knowing state of mind is a complex legal challenge, but the outcome would determine the classification of the crime and the severity of the sentence. The story of Skylar Gardner left a deep wound in the heart of Indianapolis and resonated painfully across the country. It is the tragedy of one child, one family, but it became a symbol of broader problems: the erosion of family values, the dangers of virtual reality substituting for real life, failures in the social protection system, and perhaps most frighteningly, an epidemic of indifference. The little girl who loved pink and her plush bunny will never see the sun again, never hug her brother, never know what real care and love feel like. Her short life, filled with fear, cold, and hunger, ended too soon and too cruelly. Her memory must be more than a cause for sorrow. It must be an eternal reminder that we bear responsibility for one another, especially for the most defenseless among us. Skylar's tragedy is a call to be more attentive to those living beside us, to listen not only to the sounds through the wall, but also to the voice of our own conscience, not to be afraid of seeming overly vigilant when a child's well-being is at stake. Sometimes one phone call, one word spoken out of concern, one simple action can break the circle of silence and save a life. Let the story of Skylar Gardner teach us this bitter but necessary lesson. Dallas, Texas, January 7th, 2024. Sunday morning in the southeastern Oak Cliff neighborhood began with a deceptive calm. The sunlight, still lacking its January strength, barely filtered through the blinds of the Lester family home on Grambling Drive. For 17-year-old Kia Hood, this morning was significant. She was preparing for an important and undoubtedly difficult conversation. Just 3 weeks prior, she had become a mother, and the joy of new parenthood was clouded by unresolved questions that demanded honesty. Around 10:30 a.m., Takoya Lester, Kia's mother, who was in another part of the house, heard a sound she would later describe as a thunderclap. An immediate, instinctive wave of dread washed over her. She rushed down the hallway to her daughter's room. The door was locked from the inside. Kia, are you okay?" Her voice trembled. Her initial knock was hesitant, then grew increasingly desperate. In response, there was only a ringing, unnatural silence. Silence where the laughter of her energetic daughter should have been. Perhaps interspersed with the babbling of her 3-week-old granddaughter, Iceland. Panic mounted with each passing second. Takoya tried the handle again and again, rattling the door, but it wouldn't budge. Time seemed to stand still. Desperation spurred Takoya to the only action she could think of. She ran out of the house, circled around to the side, and rushed to Kia's bedroom window. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The window screen had been dislodged and lay on the grass. Steeling herself, Takoya peered inside. The scene that met her eyes would forever divide her life into before and after. Her daughter, her vibrant, talented Kia, lay motionless on the floor. Dreams of a dance career, plans for the future, the joy of motherhood, all were obliterated in an instant by a gunshot that rang out in the quiet Sunday suburb. Ikia Imari Hood wasn't just a teenager with big plans. At 17, she was a personality, a force of nature, as those who knew her often said. In the hallways of Lancaster High School, her name was synonymous with talent and grace. As a star performer on the prestigious Tigerette drill team, she commanded attention. When Ikia danced, you couldn't look away, recalled Quinta Gossett McVeigh, one of her high school dance instructors, her voice warm with the memory. She had this innate ability to make the most complex moves look effortless and graceful. That's a rare gift, especially for a 17-year-old. She wanted to graduate, go to college, dance at the collegiate level, and she definitely had the talent for it. Friends remembered a school event where Ikia performed a solo. The initially noisy hall fell silent, then erupted in applause as she executed seemingly impossible elements with an unwavering smile. That was Ikia, one of her teammates said. She made the extraordinary look ordinary, but she never lost her spark. Her passion for dance knew no school boundaries. Since 2019, she had dedicated countless hours to training with the Next Level community dance group in Dallas. The group's director, Notori Preston, watched her grow from a promising student to a dancer with true star potential. Ikia was so alive, with a radiant smile that could light up a room, Preston shared, his fingers seeming to recall her dance steps. She was always laughing, but most importantly, she was an incredible hard worker, always striving to master new moves, pushing herself further than anyone could expect. That laugh, not just a giggle, but a full-bodied expression of joy, was remembered by everyone who knew Ikia. At home, in a large and loving family where Ikia was one of 8 children, she was the unspoken heart, capable of diffusing any tense situation with a joke or simply by her presence. Kia was a celebrity. She was everything to us, her older sister, Julia Williams, said, struggling to find words through her welling tears. When she walked into a room, everyone felt it. Not because she was loud, but because her very energy changed everything around her. She was our rock, our light. Family videos hold priceless moments. Ikia patiently teaching her younger siblings dance moves in the living room, everyone collapsing in laughter when the little ones couldn't keep up. 3 years ago, no one could have imagined what tragic mementos these recordings would become. Her notebooks were filled with choreography ideas and costume sketches. She spent hours watching college dance team performances, researching scholarship opportunities. Her dream wasn't just to dance, but to create something of her own. She talked about it constantly, Julia recalled. She was going to finish school, get her dance degree, and then open her own studio where young girls could express themselves through movement, just like she did. Ikia's Academy of Dance. That's what she wanted to call it. In December 2023, just 3 weeks before the tragic events, Ikia Hood's life was profoundly transformed. She became a mother. She named her baby girl Icelyn. This event, far from dimming her ambitions, seemed to give them a new, even more powerful impetus. "Watch me. I'll show my daughter that anything is possible," she told friends after returning from the hospital. "Now, I'm going to dance on even bigger stages because she'll be watching me." Her room became a unique space where the world of dance and the world of motherhood coexisted harmoniously. A crib stood next to a shelf laden with dance trophies and medals. In dresser drawers, dance leotards lay vachis with tiny onesies and sleepers. She would often cradle Icelyn while watching recordings of dance competitions, whispering to the newborn about the moves they would one day practice together. Her phone documented this new chapter of her life. Videos of choreography interspersed with her daughter's first smiles, sketches of dance costumes, Akanto pictures of baby outfits. Becoming a mother didn't make her give up on her dreams, her sister explained. She started planning even further ahead, talking about opening her own dance studio where young moms could bring their children during classes. Ikia had even created a special memory box for Icelyn, filling it with ribbons from her dance competitions, photos of her performances, and handwritten letters about the legacy she hoped to pass on. Ikia Hood's relationship with her 17-year-old boyfriend Trayvon Wright was complex and contradictory. IKEA's family would later describe it as an on-again, off-again romance that had lasted for about 2 years. This recurring cycle of breakups and passionate reconciliations created an extremely unstable emotional foundation, masking deeper underlying problems. Subsequently, the Hood family would painfully reveal to reporters that there was a documented history of domestic violence between the young couple. Specific incidents were not detailed in the initially released police reports, but the very existence of such a history provided critical context for understanding the events that led to IKEA's death. My best advice, if you find yourself in a similar situation, is to leave and talk to someone, get help. IKEA's sister Julia would say, her words echoing with painful experience and belated realization. "I just planned my 17-year-old sister's funeral. Please, leave." When IKEA discovered she was pregnant, Trayvon Wright apparently believed without question that he was the father of the unborn child. He made a decision that, on the surface, seemed responsible. He dropped out of Lancaster High School, telling IKEA and her family that he intended to work full-time to support her and their future baby. "He told me he would be there for IKEA and the baby, no matter what," recalled one of IKEA's friends who had observed their relationship. He talked about getting an apartment, about making sure the baby had everything it needed. This presumed role of an expectant father became central to his identity and his connection to IKEA. But then came news that ruthlessly shattered this illusion. A paternity test conducted sometime after baby Iceland's birth in December 2023 irrefutably showed Trayvon Wright was not the biological father of the child. "It devastated my daughter," Takoya Lester would later explain. IKEA genuinely believed Trayvon was the father. She had no reason to think otherwise. According to Lester, the families met to discuss the test results and seemingly agreed to move forward amicably. On the surface, there were no dramatic confrontations, no threats, at least none that outsiders witnessed. Both teenagers appeared to accept the situation, however painful it might be. "We all agreed that the most important thing was Iceland's well-being," Lester said. Trayvon's family seemed understanding. There were no signs of what was to come. However, something was brewing beneath this outward veneer of acceptance. IKEA, despite the complexity of the situation and their troubled history, decided to tell Trayvon this news personally. Text messages recovered from her phone showed that she herself had invited him to her home on that fateful Sunday morning, January 7th. She wrote that they needed to talk everything through properly and figure out where we go from here. She wanted clarity, some kind of closure, perhaps even to maintain some form of friendship, her mother recalled. That was IKEA, always looking for the best in people, always trying to find a peaceful path, even in the most difficult circumstances. She believed in second chances. That morning, IKEA had carefully dressed in her favorite pale pink sweater. She had fed Iceland and placed her in the bassinet beside her bed. The room was prepared for a conversation about the future, a difficult but necessary discussion between two young people at a crossroads. IKEA could not have known that Trayvon had come prepared for an entirely different outcome. The January morning of January 7th, 2024 was unusually warm for Dallas. By 9 a.m., IKEA had already fed Iceland, changed her, and left her under her grandmother's watchful eye in the nursery. Unlike most mornings when music and the sounds of dance practice emanated from her room, today, IKEA's bedroom remained quiet. She spent nearly an hour choosing her outfit, finally settling on a Lancaster High sweatshirt and jeans. Then she stood before her mirror for a long time, silently rehearsing the words she was about to say. At 9:47 a.m., her phone chimed, a text message from Trayvon Wright. "I'm outside." IKEA glanced towards the nursery where Iceland slept peacefully, unaware that her mother's next decision would forever alter both their lives. "He's here," IKEA called out, her voice sounding more confident than her hands felt. "We'll be in my room. It shouldn't take long." Takoya Lester watched them walk down the hallway, and the door to her daughter's bedroom closed with a soft click that would haunt her memories. It was approximately 10:05 a.m. The door, it would later be discovered, was locked from the inside. What exactly transpired in that room over the next 25 minutes can only be pieced together from fragmentary evidence, forensic data, and neighbor testimonies. IKEA's younger brother, who passed by her room twice on his way to the bathroom, would later testify. The first time, around 10:15 a.m., he heard voices, controlled but clearly tense. "You knew all along, didn't you?" That was Ikea's voice, sounding accusatory. "No, I didn't. I thought—" Trayvon's response, uncertain. "Don't lie to me, Trayvon." Not anymore. The second time, about 5 minutes later, around 10:20 a.m., the tone of the conversation had dramatically changed. The voices were louder, laced with desperation and anger. "Everyone's laughing at me now. My own family looks at me differently," Trayvon was shouting. "No one's laughing, Trayvon. This doesn't have to change everything between us." Ikea tried to calm him. "You made me believe for 9 months that this baby was mine." Then came Ikea's words, chillingly prophetic. "Lower your voice. You're scaring me." No one outside that room knew that Trayvon Wright hadn't just come for a talk. In his backpack, beneath a notebook and a water bottle, lay a loaded .38 caliber revolver, a weapon investigators would establish he had acquired just 2 days prior. While Ikea tried to find words to preserve some connection between them, Trayvon's hand, it seems, repeatedly touched the weapon in his jacket pocket. The decision had likely formed in his mind even before he crossed the threshold of that house. The exact moment when words escalated to deadly violence remains unclear. Did Ikea see the gun before it was raised? Did she have time to realize the mortal danger? Did she try to escape or defend herself? The only certainty is what happened at precisely 10:30 a.m. A single gunshot rang out so loud that, according to neighbors, a dog 3 houses down began to bark. Inside the Lester home, time seemed to fracture. Takoya, who had been folding laundry and keeping an eye on Iceland, froze. Her son dropped his video game controller. For 2 heartbeats, an incredulous silence hung in the house. That sound, it couldn't be what they feared. And then came the mother's desperate sprint down the hallway. "Kia! Ikea!" Her fists pounded on the locked door. No answer. She rattled the handle again and again with increasing force. The silence from within was more terrifying than any scream could have been. What happened next demonstrated the instinctive power of maternal fear and desperation. Instead of waiting for the door to be broken down, Takoya ran outside, circled the house, and rushed to her daughter's bedroom window. There, she found the screen pushed outward and lying on the grass, clear evidence of a hasty escape. Through the open window, she saw a scene no mother should ever witness. Ikea lay motionless on her side near her bed, facing the wall. A dark stain of blood was spreading beneath her chest. Her eyes were open, but saw nothing. The room bore signs of a short, violent struggle. An overturned table lamp, a chair thrown aside. On the floor lay Ikea's cell phone, its screen cracked. But Trayvon Wright was gone. Only the curtains, still swaying from his escape through the window, indicated how recently he had fled. At 10:40 a.m., just 10 minutes after Takoya Lester's frantic 911 call, the first police patrol car arrived at Grambling Drive. Officers found a heartbreaking scene. Takoya, having already climbed into her daughter's room through the window, refusing to believe the obvious, was cradling Ikea's lifeless body. Paramedics who arrived shortly after could only pronounce 17-year-old Ikea Hood dead at the scene. The cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the head, fired, as experts would later determine, at close range. The medical examiner would specify the wound location at trial. As investigators and forensic specialists processed the crime scene, one of the detectives noticed something clutched in Ikea's hand. Her fingers gripped the object so tightly they had to be gently pried open. It was a slightly crumpled photograph of newborn Iceland, taken just days before. In her final moments, her maternal instinct had made her reach for what was most precious. Police K-9 units analyzing blood spatters on the floor noted a detail that spoke volumes. Unlike typical shooting scenes, the pattern of the stains indicated that Ikea had tried to move, to crawl, after being wounded. But not towards the door or the window. Not in an attempt to escape, but towards a small table where she kept photos of Iceland. She wasn't trying to get away, one of the officers remarked. She was reaching for her daughter's picture. Outside, the neighborhood around Grambling Drive, near the intersection of University Hills Boulevard and East Wheatland Road, became an active search zone. Officers scoured Wright's possible escape routes, but initially found no trace of him. The Dallas Police Department issued an official statement confirming that 17-year-old Ikea Imari Hood had been shot and killed and had died at the scene. By that evening, the investigation had gathered enough evidence to name Trayvon Wright as the prime suspect. Police sources confirmed to local news station WFAA that Wright had been believed to be the father of Hood's newborn daughter. But according to the deceased's mother, the child was not his. This critical detail pointed to a clear motive for the crime. Hood had planned to tell Wright this news on Sunday, the police statement read, corroborating Takoya Lester's testimony about her daughter's intentions that morning. The Dallas Police Department acted swiftly. On January 8th, the day after the shooting, an arrest warrant was issued for Trayvon Wright on charges of murder. This initiated an intensive manhunt throughout Dallas and its surrounding areas. Law enforcement agencies Jitong Hodzo, with U.S. Marshals specializing in apprehending dangerous fugitives, joining the search. Meanwhile, Wright himself, while on the run, was making one mistake after another, leaving a trail of digital and witness evidence. CCTV cameras captured him fleeing down the street several blocks from the Lester home, constantly looking over his shoulder. At 10:51 a.m., just 20 minutes after the shot, he hailed a rideshare via a mobile app using his own phone. This provided police not only with his approximate location at that time, but also with a key witness, the driver. He looked very nervous, the driver later told investigators. Constantly checking the windows, asked me to hurry, said he was late for something important. His hands were shaking the whole time. The car took Wright to an apartment complex in North Dallas where, it turned out, a friend of his lived. The building's security cameras recorded him entering at 11:23 a.m. with his backpack. What wasn't caught on camera, but which Wright later admitted during interrogation. On the way, he stopped at a dumpster behind the building and disposed of the gun used to kill IKEA. "I just wanted to get rid of it," he would tell detectives after his arrest. "I wasn't thinking straight." The coordinated efforts of law enforcement paid off. Using cell phone data, witness statements, and information from Wright's social media, marshals and police narrowed down his possible whereabouts. Early on the morning of Tuesday, January 9th, approximately 48 hours after the murder, an operational team surrounded an apartment in East Dallas where Wright was hiding. After brief negotiations with the apartment's primary resident who convinced Wright to surrender, he came out with his hands up. "He just walked out, hands up," reported one of the U.S. Marshals involved in the arrest. No resistance, almost as if he was glad it was over. Trayvon Wright was taken to the Dallas County Jail. The arrest affidavit detailed the events leading to Hood's death. The mother hearing a noise around 10:30 a.m., finding the bedroom door locked, then seeing the open window with the screen pushed out, and finding her daughter with a fatal gunshot wound. These details painted a clear picture of both the crime itself and Wright's hasty escape from the scene. A judge set bail at $500,000, effectively ensuring he would remain in custody until trial. His booking photo distributed by the media showed a teenager with an inscrutable expression, hiding a storm of emotions or their complete absence. News of IKEA Hood's tragic death and Trayvon Wright's arrest sent a chilling wave through Lancaster High School, just as students were returning from winter break. Instead of joyful holiday stories, they were met with an official letter from the school administration and the presence of grief counselors ready to offer support. Lancaster Independent School District is deeply saddened by the tragic passing of our student IKEA Hood, the official statement read. Her death is a great loss for our district, and we will provide counseling and grief services for students and staff affected by this tragedy. Our thoughts and prayers are with her family and the entire Lancaster High School community. The counselors' offices filled immediately. Members of the Tiger A drill team gathered, hugging each other, unable to imagine practices without her infectious laughter and flawless technique. Teachers, who had watched IKEA's academic performance grow alongside her dance skills, sat stunned at their desks. Even students who had only known her casually felt the weight of this untimely loss, a potential extinguished so cruelly and prematurely. "She corrected my form once during practice," a freshman dancer recalled, tears streaming down her face. "I was so embarrassed, but then she stayed after to help me get it right. That's who she was. Demanding, but kind." The school hallways, once echoing with IKEA's laughter, fell silent. Her locker instantly transformed into a makeshift memorial. Flowers, handwritten notes, photos capturing her mid-dance. Teammates taped her competition number to the wall above the locker. Someone had placed her dance boots at the base, polished to a shine, just as she always liked them. On Wednesday, January 10th, just 3 days after the murder, hundreds of people, Students, teachers, family members, and concerned residents gathered on the school's practice field for a balloon release ceremony. The crowd formed a circle, with Akia's family at the center. Her dance uniform was displayed on a stand, her competition medals hanging from the collar. Takoya Lester, struggling to hold back tears, looked at the sea of faces that had come to honor her daughter's memory. "This is just incredible," she whispered, turning to her sister. "She let me know. She touched everyone's life, just her name. You say IKEA, and this is what happens." As hundreds of pink and white balloons, IKEA's favorite colors, soared into the cold January Texas sky, it seemed as though the reality of her absence finally descended upon everyone present. This ceremony was not just a tribute of sorrow. IKEA's friends and classmates had organized a collection of donations for her orphaned daughter, 3-week-old Iceland, bringing diapers, baby formula, and clothes. Even in their deepest grief, the community united to help the infant Katu would grow up without knowing her mother's love and care. "I know her spirit is still here with us with all these people," Takoya said, clutching her granddaughter as the last balloons disappeared into the clouds. For the Lester family, grief was compounded by concern for tiny Iceland. "She's not sleeping. She's not eating. She misses her mom," Julia Williams shared tearfully with reporters a few days after the tragedy. "Last night was my first night with her, and it was a very hard night." Even at her tender age, Iceland seemed to feel the void left by the disappearance of her mother's warmth and voice. The trauma of that day, invisible and unconscious, nonetheless imprinted itself on her fragile psyche. IKEA's 7 siblings vowed to rally around their little niece to ensure she grew up knowing how wonderful her mother was. Dance studios across Dallas expressed their support, recognizing the immense loss of talent that IKEA possessed. Julia Williams' words at a press conference became both a cry from the heart and a warning to others. "My best advice is to leave and talk to somebody, get help. I'm begging you from the bottom of my heart. I just planned my 17-year-old sister's funeral. Please, leave. Talk to your mom, talk to your aunt, talk to anybody in your family, talk to somebody at school. Please, get out of there." Her words, full of belated understanding and unbearable pain, were bought at a price no family should ever have to pay. During the balloon release, many couldn't help but notice how the expressions on little Iceland's face, sleeping in her grandmother's arms, sometimes mirrored her mother's. The same determined set of her jaw, the same curious eyes, taking in the world around her. In that tiny face, IKEA Hood's legacy continued. Breathing, moving, living, despite everything a bullet had tried to destroy. A year later, in January 2025, Trayvon Wright, by then 18 years old, stood trial in a Dallas County courtroom facing a first-degree murder charge. Dressed in a formal shirt and tie, he had lost a significant amount of weight during his year in custody. His eyes darted nervously between the jurors, the judge, and IKEA's family, who occupied the front row of the courtroom. The silence in the courtroom became almost palpable when Wright, against his lawyer's advice, chose to testify in his own defense, a risky move that surprised even seasoned court observers. His voice was barely audible at first. He painted a picture of a tragic accident, not a premeditated murder. "I never meant to hurt IKEA," he stated, his eyes downcast. "I wish I had killed myself, then she would still be here. It was an accident, period." According to his testimony, he had previously been diagnosed with depression and an anxiety disorder. The paternity test results, confirming he was not Iceland's father, had, in his words, pushed him to the brink. He claimed he brought the gun to IKEA's house that day, not to harm her, but to end his own life. "I couldn't see a future anymore," Wright testified, his voice cracking. "Everything I thought I had, being a father, having a family, it was all gone. I just wanted the pain to stop." Wright described how, while sitting on IKEA's bed, he took the gun out of his backpack. He claimed he put the barrel to his own head, and it was at that moment IKEA saw what he was doing and lunged at him. "She tried to grab the gun," he said. "We were struggling for it, pulling it back and forth, and then it just went off. I didn't mean to pull the trigger. I would never intentionally hurt IKEA." The defense built its entire case on this version of events. In the absence of direct eyewitnesses to the shooting itself, the prosecution had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was not a terrible accident during a suicide attempt. Wright's attorney repeatedly emphasized this point during cross-examination of prosecution witnesses. You were trying to figure out what happened because you were not in the room when the gun discharged, correct? The lawyer asked Takoya Lester as she testified. Correct, she replied through tears. All right, thank you, ma'am, the lawyer concluded, nodding manjak at the jury. However, the prosecution had science on their side. The medical examiner, using detailed diagrams and autopsy photos, too graphic for some jurors, demonstrated why Wright's version did not align with the physical evidence. The angle of the gunshot wound is inconsistent with a struggle, the expert explained, pointing to the photos. In a struggle, we would expect an unusual angle, perhaps an upward or sideways trajectory of the bullet path. Instead, we see a direct wound, characteristic of a situation where someone points a gun directly at the victim's head and fires. Firearms expert James Wilcox also testified that the revolver, recovered from the dumpster where Wright had discarded it, required significant pressure to pull the trigger. This is not a weapon with a hair trigger, Wilcox explained. It is extremely unlikely that this gun would discharge accidentally during a struggle without someone deliberately pulling the trigger. But perhaps the most damaging testimony for the defense came from Wright himself, under the prosecutor's skilled cross-examination. When asked why he fled the scene if it was an accident, Wright struggled to provide a coherent answer. I was scared, he said. I wasn't thinking straight. Scared enough to climb out a window instead of using the door? The prosecutor pressed. Yes. Scared enough to take a rideshare to a friend's apartment instead of calling 911? Yes. Scared enough to throw the gun in a dumpster? Wright whispered. Yes. So quietly, it was barely audible in the courtroom. If this was truly an accident, Mr. Wright, the prosecutor continued, his voice ringing in the ensuing silence, why didn't you stay and try to help IKEA? Why didn't you call for her mother? Why didn't you try to save the mother of the child you claim to care so much about? A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Wright had no answer. The prosecution built its case on what they called the 3 C's: character, capability, and consciousness of guilt. They presented evidence that Wright had previous run-ins with the law as a juvenile. They proved he knew how to handle a firearm. And, most importantly, they highlighted his actions after the shooting, fleeing, hiding the weapon, evading arrest, all pointing to someone who knew exactly what he had done. As closing arguments approached, the jury had 2 starkly different narratives to consider. Was this a troubled young man who accidentally killed someone he cared about during a suicide attempt? Or was this a deliberate murder committed by someone enraged by paternity test results who then tried to evade responsibility? After 3 days of testimony and 6 hours of deliberation, on Friday, January 17, 2025, the jury returned to the courtroom. The room fell silent in anticipation. Trayvon Wright sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the jury box. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Jones asked. Yes, Your Honor. We, the jury, find the defendant, Trayvon Darnell Wright, guilty of murder in the 1st degree. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. IKEA's mother covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Wright showed little reaction, only a slight slump of his shoulders. The judge sentenced Trayvon Wright to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Mr. Wright, the judge addressed him, you cut short a promising young life and robbed a child of her mother. While I acknowledge your youth, the calculated nature of this crime and your subsequent actions cannot be overlooked. Outside the courthouse, Takoya Lester, surrounded by her family, addressed the waiting journalists. Today doesn't bring us closure because there's no such thing when you lose a child, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. But it does bring us some peace, knowing that the person responsible will face consequences. Julia Williams stood beside her mother, holding 1-year-old Iceland, who bore a striking resemblance to her mother. We're all coming together to make sure Iceland knows who her mom was, Julia said. She was amazing. She was everything. She loved you, she added, looking at her niece. In the year since IKEA's death, Iceland had grown into a cheerful, energetic toddler. She had started dancing as soon as she could stand, swaying to music with the same natural rhythm her mother had shown. Sometimes it's like seeing IKEA all over again, Takoya Lester said, watching her granddaughter. Lancaster High School established a memorial scholarship in Ikea Hood's name for students wishing to study dance in college. The Tigerette drill team dedicated their season to her memory, performing with pink ribbons on their uniforms and creating a signature move called the Ikea Spin. The tragedy also prompted local schools to develop awareness programs about relationship violence and its warning signs. Community support groups for young parents expanded their services, offering resources for teenagers navigating the complexities of early parenthood. Iselin will dance on stages her mother never got to, Julia said with quiet determination. She'll graduate, go to college. She'll have all the opportunities Ikea should have had. We can't bring her mother back, but we can make sure Ikea's dreams live on through her daughter. The story of Ikea Imari Hood is more than just a tragedy. It is an agonizing reminder of the fragility of young life, of the destructive power of jealousy and uncontrolled anger, and of the critical importance of recognizing red flags in relationships before it's too late. Julia Williams' words resonate as a bitter warning. What was done to my sister, I don't want it to happen to anyone else. I don't want another family to feel this pain. For little Iselin, justice is an abstract concept. No verdict can bring back the bedtime stories, the dance lessons, the graduation cheers that should have come from her mother. Yet, in her young face, the family sees Ikea's features, her spirit, her passion, already emerging. Ikea Hood's dance was brutally cut short, but the echo of her story, her light, her unfulfilled dreams must continue to resonate as a warning, as a call for vigilance, and as a quiet hope that her legacy, embodied in her daughter and in the memory of those who loved her, will help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Every story of violence told is a chance to save a life. Ikea Hood should not have died, and no one else should.